super excited to have you all join us here. Thank you very much for coming. We have the podcast, as you know. Just to let you know that we've got the next episode out tomorrow, which will be talking about leadership in orthopaedics and leadership generally. So super excited by that. I wanted just to mention that we are taking a short break. I'm sure everyone's had a little bit of webinar fatigue, and we're just taking a short break for the rest of the summer as we focus on some new content. We've got some super exciting new stuff coming your way, and then we're also planning for the autumn series of webinars. So do bear with us. There'll be lots of new content coming up on the website, but we thought we'd give everyone a break from the webinars. The one thing that we're really keen to do at OrthoHub is to work with the really good people, people with shared goals and shared visions all around the country and internationally. So I'm very excited and proud to announce that we are now have an affiliation with BOTA. BOTA very much are focusing on making orthopaedic surgical education and training better for the trainees, by the trainees, for the benefit of patients. And that's certainly where we come from. So I'm super excited about that. When it comes to working with the best people, I'm also excited to have our panel tonight. We've got a really fantastic panel, and today's session is going to be talking about resilience. So please do get involved on the chat. Please do get involved in the Q&A. And this is a different kind of webinar to what we're normally used to. But I genuinely think this is going to be one of the most valuable and most important webinars that we host, because now more than anything, this is really, really a key factor in how we manage, survive, and go forward. So with that, I'll hand over to Sue. Thank you very much, Sue.
Hello, I am so sorry. I am in my office at work and somebody's trying to phone me, so bear with me for one moment. I'm Sue Deakin. I'm orthopaedic consultant at West Suffolk Hospital in Bury St Edmunds, and my interest in wellbeing and in resilience has really come from my human factors leadership role, which crossovers with patient safety but also wellbeing. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on this subject, and I'm hoping to learn just as much as you are. And I have a fantastic team of panelists who are also very interested in this topic, and I'm sure that we'll all learn together. So I'm going to ask the others to introduce themselves. So Tony, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Sue. I'm Tony Clayson, so you may know me. I'm an orthopaedic consultant at Wrightington, who for many, many years thought I was very resilient, and then realized what I thought was resilience was actually overwork and killing myself. The COVID crisis has highlighted to me and colleagues their challenges. And as we try and rebuild services, to me, maintaining personal resilience and of our team is a vital factor. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our experts, and thank you for the invitation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for, it's great to be here. My name is Sarah Swanton, and I don't work for the NHS. I work as a wellbeing and resilience coach, and I work with business leaders and their teams. And really, to sum it up in a sentence or two, really what I'm up to with that is to help them get done what it is they want to get done with less on their mind. And yeah, really helping people to operate more from a place of calm, clarity, common sense. And what happens when people operate from that space is they tend to make better decisions. They tend to feel more resilient, which is obviously what we're up to tonight. And generally enjoy life a little bit more. It doesn't feel like it's coming at them as much. So I'm delighted to be on this panel tonight and share what we can, hopefully will be helpful to you guys.
Okay, Emily, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Dr. Emily Baker. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist at West Suffolk Hospital. Normally I hang out in paediatrics and have worked alongside Sue looking after some kids with orthopaedic issues from time to time, particularly with pain management and those kinds of things. And since the beginning of COVID, I've been redeployed across, and my team work across the trust supporting staff in terms of improving their well-being in what has been an incredibly challenging few months. So So my interest here today is to share our learning really from what people have struggled with across the organisation here, and also to think about what clinical psychology brings to the ideas of resilience, which for us psychologists is a bit of a challenging concept, shall we say. So just to kind of look at what is useful to take from that concept, what you can do individually, what you can do as a team, what you can do as a wider system, and hoping that people get something useful out of it.
Okay, thank you. So just because we have lots of orthopaedic people in the audience, I'd just like to use a few orthopaedic terminologies here. Most of us as orthopods have learnt what the resilience of a material is by looking at a stress strain curve and realizing that resilience of a material is the area under a stress strain curve in the elastic area. So it's an area at which the material can recover. But every material has a breaking point, and so does every person. And the slope of that curve is probably different for each person. And so I use that sometimes to help me understand what resilience is. So what I'd like you to do, if you can, is to tell me in the chat, or tell us in the chat, what you think resilience means to you. So if you could just have a think for a moment and just pop that into the chat for us, that would be really helpful, because it's a difficult concept to understand for a lot of us, and it'd be really useful to know what people's understanding of resilience is. And whilst you're doing that, I'm going to ask Tony what his impression of what resilience means to him.
Well, as I said, Sue, I always regarded resilience as my ability to just keep going and going and going, and probably not look after myself. And I suspect I'm not alone in many people who function in the MSK world, not just orthopaedic surgeons, but general musculoskeletal practitioners. And I think I, to my dismay, drove myself to a very bad place in my early 50s and realized actually resilience is not just driving yourself to exhaustion. It's, as we will hopefully hear, it's something within us that we can draw on to help us cope with rapidly changing situations. I know that sounds vague as a concept, and if you ask me at the end, having learned from our esteemed colleagues, I'll probably give you a different definition, but it is not, as MSK practitioners tend to think, working and working and working and just taking everything on the chin.
Thank you very much, Tony. Emily, can you give your description of what you think resilience is, and then we'll see what everybody else is thinking.
So resilience, I think, has got lots of different meanings, and the one that I particularly like is people's ability to cope in the moment, and to I think actually somebody's put in the chat what I would agree with is being able to take a difficult situation, deal with it in the moment, and then be able to learn from it and use that experience to grow. I think that really sums it up. Actually, from a psychology point of view, I would totally wholeheartedly agree with that.
Thank you, Aparna. She used to be one of our trainees, so she must have learned some resilience when she was here, and now she's working in Tony's hospital. Okay, so Sarah, what about you?
Well, yeah, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would say, yeah, grit and bear it, white knuckle my way through each day, force myself. And now I have a very different view. I think following on from what Emily said, I mean, my own personal definition, which I've come to, is resilience is our innate capacity to deal with the needs of the moment, no matter what. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago, or even further back than that, I would have argued it wasn't innate. I would have said, no, it's something that's outside of us that we have to develop and grow. And but I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay, so Tony.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting looking at the chat, because I think there's themes here, and the theme I gave of how I approached resilience is people passing comments saying tolerance, adapting to challenges presented to us. That's very much the reactive image of resilience I had. as opposed to perhaps, and it's really interesting to hear this ability to deal with the moment, adapt but reflect and learn from it, which is a subtle difference, but from a personal well-being perspective, I can say it's a really big mindset shift to make. And so those two themes are coming up in the comments people are making, which is really interesting and says it's worthwhile as tonight. Thank you.
And I'm going to ask one more question of the panelists and also to the audience. Do you think that some people are more resilient than others? So, Sarah.
No, I think everybody has the capacity for resilience. I'm going to caveat this. Some people don't know they're resilient, and that's what gets in the way. But everyone has the capacity.
Emily?
No, I think that I agree that everybody has everyone is resilient. I think some people's personal circumstances are more challenging than others. I think it is, people have got somebody who's living in a one-bedroom flat with 4 other people going through lockdown recently is going to have a very different experience from somebody who lives in a nice house with a huge garden in a lovely environment. And that doesn't mean that those two people, one's finding it easier than the other, doesn't mean that they're not resilient. It means they're exposed to different circumstances than each other.
And I suppose that helps us decide what the difference is between personal resilience and system resilience, or the surroundings and the environment that we're in. But we're going to come on to that in more detail with our expert psychologist. So first person who's going to give you a little presentation is Emily. She's going to tell you a little bit about what she's been learning over all of these years and how she can share it with us. Thank you.
Okay. Oh dear, sorry, that wasn't quite what I intended to share. Let's go for that one. So just bear with me just a second. Can you now see my screen? Hopefully everybody can.
No, we can't see it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Let's try again. It worked a minute ago. Let's do that one.
Yeah.
Now, is that better?
Yes, we can
Excellent.
see.
Yay.
Thank you.
Let's share that. There we go. Okay, so this is a fairly whistle-stop tour through the resilience issues that we've been facing here at the West Suffolk, and I'm sure are replicated across lots of your experiences too. I'm starting with a few definitions of resilience. These have all come from different dictionaries. So the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, an ability to recover or adjust easily to misfortune or change, the ability to be happy, successful again after something bad has happened, the ability of a substance to return to its usual shape after being bent, stretched or pressed. That's your Sue from the things. And psychological resilience used to be described as the ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis and to return to pre-crisis status quickly. So, and resilience exists when the person uses mental processes and behaviours in promoting personal assets and protecting themselves from the potential negative effects of stressors. There's a really big challenge with resilience. It's not just located in an individual. You can be a really resilient person, but put in a situation where actually it's just not okay. And so it is okay to not be okay in a pandemic. That is not you not being resilient. No amount of resilience is going to make it okay to make somebody walk into an ITU to prone a patient without the right PPE on. That's not okay. And it's not okay to operate without safe staffing levels or without, your ODP colleagues and your anaesthetic colleagues who might still be exhausted from all the things that they've been doing during this COVID period. It doesn't mean that those staff teams aren't resilient. It just means they've had different experiences over the last few months. And it can sometimes be used as a way of managers sometimes absolving themselves of responsibility of dealing with a situation that just isn't okay. So teams get described as, they're just not very resilient, whereas actually they've got legitimate reasons to be struggling. So that's my cautionary note, really, that resilience is a complicated issue. And from a psychologist point of view, we're not that keen on resilience as a concept, because it kind of when misused, locate the problem in the person rather than looking at the whole situation and the whole system. It can be, well, if you were just a bit more resilient, you'd be able to cope with that. No, it's a pandemic. So this was a slide that we were sharing right at the beginning of the pandemic that's based on previous trauma experiences, and it talks through the expected response to a trauma situation. So you start at the left-hand side of the screen with that kind of pre-disaster when everybody could see it coming and was getting really quite worried, and then there was a bit of galvanizing and we're all in it together, and a bit of kind of come on, we can do this, and heroic, and lots of rapid changes happening and people putting in place new structures, and people being discharged from hospitals, whole services being put on hold. There was lots of that kind of readiness stuff, that heroic, we can do this kind of thing. There was a brief honeymoon period where it was sort of all right. And people were adjusting to their new situations, and then very rapidly disillusionment. I mean, that could have been when people were clapping for carers on a Thursday night and then celebrating VE Day on the Friday. That could have been your moment of disillusionment. It could have been recognizing that you, as somebody who's actually previously been held in very high esteem in the hospital because you generated an awful lot of money for the NHS and for for your hospital trust, are suddenly asked to, you're not necessarily all of your operations and get cancelled, and everything that you would normally be doing is put on hold. That might be very challenging for your sense of identity, and for your own, you might become disillusioned and not quite know what to do with your time. Other people will have been redeployed and gone from being an absolute expert in their field to suddenly being thrown into doing something where they don't necessarily feel very expert. And again, that might have been your moment of disillusionment. Or people going for an eye test to Barnard Castle, possibly. That might have been it. Different people will have had different experiences and different moments. Or maybe when somebody that they love was ill, or when they couldn't go and visit the person that they loved. That disillusionment came in lots of different forms, and lots of people are still there. That's still where they're at. They're exhausted, they're disillusioned, and other people will be absolutely ready to do the reconstruction and the learning, and all of those, kind of ready to get going and restart services. But some of their colleagues, may well still be somewhere else on this curve. So we talked a lot at the start of this about normal responses to abnormal situations. So the typical things you see when people are put under a high amount of stress is confusion, poor attention, difficulties making decisions, even from people who would previously have made a decision just like that. Attempts to over control other people when you can't control a situation like a pandemic, go into command and control mode, and they start telling other people what to do. They take control of the situation, which will make them feel better, but will make those around them feel much worse. You'll get people with compassion stress, feeling helpless and isolated, compassion fatigue, where they're just demoralized and exhausted. Lots of people not feeling able to cope. This is a normal response to an abnormal situation. The most common ones that we've seen over the last 4 months have been difficulties with sleep, headaches, stomach aches, being easily startled, being very irritable and angry and frustrated. All of those things are really common in response to this kind of situation. And we're now seeing lots of burnout, just feeling emotionally exhausted and disengaged, just needing a break. Because lots of people haven't really taken very much annual leave because you couldn't go anywhere, and they may have gone 6, 7, 8 months without annual leave. There's also then a massive proportion of people who have got secondary traumatization, where they can see or they know someone or they're helping somebody who is suffering from trauma. This can emerge really rapidly. It's very similar to PTSD, and will include people avoiding and re-experiencing the anxiety-provoking situation. So I'm going to really quickly rattle through a psychological theory of emotion regulation, that we've all got this threat detection system, which has been on a high alert. Normally, our self-soothing system would come into play, where we would do all the things that boss back that threat detection system and put it back in its place in order to create more capacity for the drive stuff, for your creativity, your concentration, your ability to think and plan, all of those things. But all the things we would normally do to self-soothe disappeared overnight. You couldn't go to the pub with friends, you couldn't go to the gym, you couldn't do any of the things you might normally do. And so that then meant that people had less bandwidth to cope with what the world was throwing at them. In the hospital, we tried to focus on supporting people to think about what they can do. There was lots of stuff that people have no control over. So the things you can't control, it's no point wasting your energy about. You can't control what the party your neighbours are having at the end of the street when you come home from a 13-hour shift and you're exhausted and you've been working in ITU and they're treating it like it's a glorified holiday. You can't control that, but you can control how you react to it. So you can't control what other people are going to say to you or how they're going to behave or how long it's going to go on for or the unknowns, the what ifs. You can't control any of that. But you can focus on what you do. You can make sure you're doing the right thing, that you're following social distancing, that you're washing your hands, that you're looking after yourself by eating well, resting, staying active, not going on social media, not engaging with any of that, step away from it, keeping in touch with people, finding fun things to do, and actually. So as leaders, it's anybody within the orthopaedic services, you've got lots of things that you can do to support other people and to support yourselves. Creating that sense of safety, identifying other people's concerns, reassuring them, being calm. You know, you need to manage prolonged periods of arousal, explain anxiety, passionate towards the other people in your teams. And that involves tolerating personal distress, being empathic, taking appropriate action, being alive to the suffering of those around you, and being non-judgmental. It's a hard thing to do under these circumstances, but where you've got to bear that in mind when restarting services. Some of your colleagues will be at different parts of that graph that we talked about at the beginning. You all need to rebuild together. You need to take other people with you. Some people might be exhausted. Some of your theatre staff might be really exhausted, particularly in district general hospitals where they might have been redeployed into ITU for the past few months. You need to give them space to recover. And resilience of the system is important. It's not just about individual resilience. It's about the resilience of a system. Like I was saying before, people's individual resilience will be based on their own personal circumstances as much as anything else. You need to be compassionate to yourself and others. It is okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel like keeping going is not actually a viable option under these circumstances, and to take a break and to take your leave. That's okay. It's a normal response to an abnormal situation. It doesn't mean you're not resilient. So that's my whistle stop tour through from a psychological point of view. I think it is a really challenge. It's been a really challenging few months. We have seen high levels of people coping in absolutely unprecedented circumstances, and everybody's resilient. They just might need to look after themselves for a bit to be able to get back to what they were doing, or they might be incredibly frustrated from having been stuck at home, or you might be having colleagues who are returning after shielding and who need you to be compassionate towards them and to understand that they've gone from not seeing anybody at all ever, just being in the four walls of their house, to suddenly being in your spaces that you've been in all of this time and are quite confident with, and they might need some support to be able to cope with that. So we've had different challenges at different times, but everybody is resilient. It's a normal response to an abnormal situation. That's my kind of introductory take.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. So I don't know, a lot of that really rings true with me. I do know that there's a recent article in JAMA that states that orthopods are probably more resilient than the average person or type of clinical person, but I think that's a misconception by others. Maybe we put on this tough exterior and we consider ourselves tough, which is another word for resilience. We feel we have to live up to that expectation, and I think other people misinterpret us and feel that we are not feeling the same that they may be feeling. I certainly feel that in my own experience. Tony, what do you think about that?
I think you're spot on, Sue. I think this is what I mean about the definition of resilience. Part of the persona, shall I say, the caricature of orthopaedic practice is the bold man or woman who is determined and who does what he or she does and doesn't let things faze them. That is a front. I'll call it out now. That is a front. I lived with that front for many years, and this one of the reasons for sort of learning so much about this in the last few months is that it is a front that colleagues are slowly starting to realise is a front. And in fact, the great thing about the participants we've got today, I just scanned through, I recognise some names. They're not all orthopaedic surgeons. We've got therapists on this call. We've got trainees, we've got consultants. I have to say, some of my nursing and therapy colleagues are far more attuned to the concept of looking after themselves, compassionate leadership, and well-being in the true sense. And I think if nothing else comes out of this panel this evening, we want to take away the fact that we're all in it with the same emotional feelings. And just before I finish, I've been attending numerous meetings the last few weeks, National Orthopaedic Alliance with chief executives of orthopaedic trusts on, meetings of non-clinical workers. This resilience is a big issue for all of us. And if we don't bring it together how we work as a team, then our service will not get reactivated effectively. And at the minute, I think orthopaedic surgeons were focusing on the practicalities of getting back and doing our operations. And I know why we're doing it, because it's what makes us feel good. I think we're at risk of not taking our teams with us. So long-winded, I know, but this is passionate from my heart as somebody who's spent many years being a command and control person and is just reflecting on the casualties I've created over the years.
Thank you. That's really insightful, Tony. And I definitely, that resonates with me. I come from I'm in an orthopaedic team who works really well together usually, but this has really tested our team. It's tested us for very different reasons for different members of our team, because we are all different characters. And some people have demonstrated their stress with tears, me, others with anger, others with frustration. And I think these are just the behaviours that have developed as we've had our resilience tested. So just before we move on to Sarah, I'm going to just ask people to mention in the chat what kind of things have tested your resilience over the last few months and even before COVID, because I do know with all the long waiting lists, all the pressures on theatre capacity, at work even, yet alone the problems at home that all of us have at different times, what kinds of things have tested your resilience the most over the last few months? And I suspect there'll be lots of different answers, but some of them will be quite similar. So if you could just put that into the chat. And whilst we're doing that, I think what's tested my resilience the most is believing that I'm not resilient enough to cope with this, and feeling that people will judge me if I own up to the fact that I'm struggling. Thankfully, I have reached out. I think Emily's supported me a little bit along the way. Thank you, because I'm in the wellbeing team. It's great being in the wellbeing team. You get lots of support from really clever people. Can I
just comment, Sue, sorry to interrupt you, can I just comment on that, because it's a really powerful message, because we didn't have an extensive wellbeing team early on in this process, shall we say. We did. We had a Steps for Wellness team that everybody called in when there was an emergency, but actually there are now 5 of us within, well, 6 leads and 5 of us that are medics saying it's okay to not be okay, to staff that would not expect us to say that, has been transformational.
Yeah.
And I think the people on this call, if they take nothing else away from that today, everybody's feeling the same. Start talking to your team in that way and they'll go with you.
And answering some of the questions in the chat, there are absolutely places that you can speak to people. I will share in the chat some telephone numbers you can call if you are struggling. There's some excellent resources out there about supporting family members. And actually, it is really important that people do reach out for help. There is help out there. You'll have versions of me everywhere. And we're not judging people, and we're trying to support people to use the skills that we've got that usually only the patients benefit from, but to try and direct some of those skills to members of staff. It is really important that people know that it's okay to not be okay. You're not going to get judged if you come and see a psychologist. We just want to be able to help. That's all it is.
The MSK theme is clearly coming strong of lack of control, loss of identity as normal elective services, disappear. And we need to take that into account, because as we move forward out of this, and we keep saying out of it, I've stopped saying living post-COVID, we're living with COVID. And the new future of MSK services will not be the same. And we're going to have to support all of us through that and our teams through that, because I don't think we'll return back to how we were for a very, very long time. And that might sound negative. I think the positive that comes out of it, if we all support each other's compassionately and resiliently, or resilience, we will work through it together. And I know Sarah's going to give us some thoughts on how we can support ourselves and our teams with us on our resilience. Perfect.
Okay, so it is very interesting in the chat. We've had lots of people talking about how tough it is, and some of our trainees in particular were saying how difficult it has been for them not being able to get their training opportunities. Remote working, it doesn't give us patient contact in the same way as we've had before. Relationships, we've been separated from our teams, and we're missing our surgical care practitioners who've been grabbed to go and work on ITU, and they are our main sort of social support that we can admit our inner feelings to. They're the sort of things that we're feeling, I think. So on that note, I think Sarah's now going to give us a little talk about some tips about how to dig deep and reach inside to that inner resilience to the best of our ability. And then we'll have a chat afterwards.
Okay, yeah, we'll have a chat afterwards. Let's go. I'm just going to share my screen. Whiz it back to the beginning. So yeah, I mean, what I'm going to cover is resilience, which you've already started to talk about, how resilience works and how it doesn't. This is going to be an interesting one, and also a very simple mindset shift that can actually I find it really helps people to spend more time coming from their place of resilience and less time from stress and burden and overwhelm. So feel free throughout to, if there's anything that occurs to you, any questions you want to ask, please just ask away. Oh, run away. So we've covered this already. What does resilience mean to you? Just you've answered this question already, haven't you? Here we go. Oh, like magic. How resilient would you consider yourself to be? So this is on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being extremely resilient. I back myself in situations. I know I can rely on myself. And 0 is really, really don't feel confident at all. Where would you say you are? Let's give you a couple of moments to do that. Okay, so we have the majority quite high. This is good. 8 out of 10, couple of 10 out of 10. So 7, around the 7 and 8 mark is where the majority of you are sitting. No one's a 0, that's great. Okay, and that's really interesting. So hold that number in your mind, maybe just make a note of it, hold it in your mind, and maybe we can check in with that in a few moments. So, as I said earlier, resilience is our innate capacity to navigate the needs of the moment no matter what. Now that's quite a big statement, isn't it? Innate and no matter what. But I'm going to do my best in the time that we have to show you more about what that means, to unpack that a little bit. So resilience is, if you think of it in terms of, there's some other words that would describe it. So it could look like wisdom. So a few of you were talking earlier about you know, walking into situations where you don't feel safe. Sometimes resilience looks like something comes to you and you end up having quite an assertive conversation saying, I'm not feeling very comfortable with this. I'm afraid I'm not going to do this. That's resilience in action. Sometimes it looks like an insight that just comes to you about maybe a decision you've been trying to make for a few days or even a few weeks, and suddenly there's that moment of insight that comes to you. Resilience also looks like a realization sometimes. Sometimes you can have a realization. And I don't know if this was true for you, Tony, that there was a moment when you had a realization, and someone in the chat mentioned this as well, that working harder, working longer, for a long time, that looked like that was a strategy. And there was a moment at which, you know, maybe resilience showed up as, if you don't take a break, I'm going to give you a break. And that's when the realization happens. So it can show up like that. It can show up as an aha or a light bulb moment. It can show up as a moment of clarity of, I don't need to do this anymore, or I don't need to work like this anymore, or all sorts of, it's not, it's something that comes from within you. It's a fresh new thought that comes to you that helps you out with the way that you're living life at that moment, in any given moment. And what I found really interesting is, I think it was Deepa who mentioned in the comments that actually COVID was, during that time, it was a really amazing time, because it meant that colleagues and the team were really bonding and getting close. And that's really interesting as well. That could be a realization, like, actually it's not COVID that's causing my stress, because how is it that some people are really doing very well and thriving and others are not? So there's something going on there as well. And that could be a realization, because when we realize that it's not the situation that's coming at me and making me feel this way, it's the way that I'm thinking about it in the moment, innocently, then that can provide it can provide relief, because it means that you feel, you suddenly realize you're not at the mercy of your circumstances. There is an element of, there are options to how you respond rather than just one way. So does that make sense? All the different ways that resilience can show up. Does it give a slightly different slant on it? Essentially, these guys here who've written this book, Invisible Power, Insight Principles at Work, I certainly recommend it. It's a good book to read. And they are my mentors, and they say resilience is not something you do. Resilience is built into the design of the human mind, which is a relief to know, isn't it? So 3 things to let you know about resilience. The first is it's innate. It's built into the design of the human operating system. It's always switched on, it's always available, and it's infinite. You can't wear it out. It just can't always be seen or felt, but it's always there. It's a bit like the sun. You know, it's always there behind the clouds, but we don't always, sometimes we forget it's there when it's a really thick, cloudy day. And also built into the design of when I say system, I mean ourselves, the human operating system. There's a feedback system that lets you know when you've stopped using resilience, and it helps you get back on track. So I'm just going to run through those now. So resilience is innate. There is nothing you actually have to do. And one of the traditional parts about resilience training is that there are a number of tools or techniques that you would have to learn and do on a daily basis or every day, ideally. So, for example, if you do this every day, then you will be resilient. Well, I work with, just like you guys, I work with business people who are incredibly busy. They don't have time to get up every morning and meditate and journal and do exercises to try and boost their resilience. They just don't have time to do that. And so where I'm pointing to is that resilience is something that we, because it's innate, it's not additive. You don't have to add anything to your daily routine in order to be resilient. You already have it. It's almost, well, it is. It's more subtractive than that. The more we let go, because the thing that gets in the way of resilience is thought and thinking. And particularly when a few of you were mentioning earlier on about how, well, you know, I had this, you know, there's a stiff upper lip kind of culture. And when you walk around thinking you have to have that, you know, you have to be strong and not admit that you're struggling, and you think everybody else is naturally, you know, floating around the place, and you think you're the only one, but you're trying to put a face on that. That's really difficult, and it's a reason why people get exhausted quite quickly, because it's using a lot of thought. It's like, I know I should be feeling like this, but I'm not, and so I'm going to have to act and fake it, and then as well as all of that, I've got to do my day job. So that can exhaust someone really, really quickly, when actually there's no one's broken and there's nothing wrong with you. It's that sometimes we think there's something wrong with us, and that's what causes the problem. So sometimes when you think you're not resilient or you can't cope, because we're feeling our thinking all the time, if you're walking around thinking, I can't do this, I can't cope, I don't think I can get through the day, then guess what? That's what you're experiencing. So you're walking around with that, but actually underneath all of that big, thick cloud of thinking, resilience is just there underneath, and it's very, very quiet. It's very quiet. It's like, I think I mentioned this last time, it's like the little piccolo underneath the big brass band. It's very quiet, and but when you get ears for it, you hear it. So it's been helping you out all your life. And the thing about human beings is we're very quick to think about what's going wrong with us rather than what's going right with us. And I wonder if you can think now back to times in your life where on the face of it, you've dealt with some really challenging situations or events. And it might not just be work. You know, some of you have mentioned things going on in your personal life as well, really challenging situations where you've lost family members, and where you would think, on the face of it, you would think, I wouldn't be able to cope if that happened. But if you look back to times in your life, there will have been snippets of moments where the worst actually happened, and yet on the inside, you were calm and you knew what to do and you did it. And I wonder if you can think of those moments now. Maybe some of those moments come to mind now. I know for me, I've had moments like that where on the face of it, I would think, God, I would never be able to cope with that. And actually, I just knew what to do. And it wasn't like I was consciously thinking what to do. It was like there was a deeper intelligence just running. It was just obvious. I just knew what to do. Can you relate to that at all? And of course, this is true for every single human being. So for those of you who are leaders or parents, if you're a human being, you have resilience, and you only have to look at little children. To, if any of you've got children or nieces or nephews, the way they get over stuff is exemplary. You know, they they can be crying one moment and then the next moment they're over it. I remember when my daughter started nursery, and she used to cry every day. Every day she would cry, and I would have to leave because I'd have to get on with my day. And I'd always call when I got back, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, she's fine. She's fine." So I'm still, you know, in my head about it, and she's moved on playing with all her mates. So it's, as a leader, it's good to know that it's true for every human being, because if you are a leader and you think you have to hold it on all your shoulders and be resilient for everybody else, that's a misunderstanding, an innocent misunderstanding. And actually, if you can say, if you're in a team and you can actually say, do you know what, I'm a bit up in my head today, I'm a bit caught up in my thinking, can you help me? I've got to do this, have you got any ideas of what we could do? And there's no shame in saying that. There's no shame in calling upon someone else to help you out when you're, and it's only temporary. The thing about stress and anxiety, the less we pay attention to it, the quicker it moves on. It's like weather, it's just moving through us. And if you're human, that's what we experience it. You know, to be human is to have sometimes several different emotions in the space of half an hour. And that's okay. So I think what you guys have been doing, talking about it's okay not to be okay, that might be just revolutionary. Like even that makes a big difference. Do you guys want to say anything? Tony, Sue, Emily?
Is that
That's
talk
it.
finished? Is you finished your slides there, Sarah?
No, I've still got a few to go, but I just wondered
Okay.
if you wanted to say anything so far, or
I just want to strongly support what you've said, or the messages coming through the chat are, I think it's actually a failing of us as surgeons that we have tried to portray this image of being unbreakable. And I think the time has come where this crisis will show us we've got to break that image and show that there is a compassionate side to surgeons that can take our team with us. And if we don't, we will not only disappoint ourselves, we will fail to reactivate a proper service. So I basically endorse everything you're saying, and looking forward to hearing a bit more of your thoughts as how we can take our team resilience with us, not just us as individuals.
Yeah, and I'd like to say something too. It really hit home to me today, Sarah, that I think I personally have wasted a lot of energy feeling bad for feeling bad at times. And that has exhausted me at times. I think Emily would probably nod her head to that, having observed me over these last few months, and feeling guilty for feeling bad and as if I'm weak, and concerned about admitting it. I mean, I have, but I think it has helped me to do that. And hopefully it's helped other people to feel that they can do it too.
It's amazing, isn't it? What, you know, just saying that, it gives permission to other people. Oh, yeah, me too, you know?
I think that's been the biggest learning in our organisation, is that we put a really big push on it's okay to not be okay right at the beginning of this. And once one person has started talking about it, it's broken that taboo, you know, to talk about it. And then everyone else goes, oh, yeah, me too. Oh, yeah, no, oh, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one who wasn't sleeping. No, you're all not sleeping. It's normal. You know, it's that mindset shift, and that actually you're more resilient as a team, supporting each other, than you are as individuals stepping apart from each other and hiding from each other how you're feeling. There's a really lovely image of a man who's run the end of the marathon. I think it was from the London Marathon last year, and he's clearly exhausted. He's kind of weaving his way down the last section, and then a couple of other people who've also just run a marathon tuck their arms underneath him and kind of help him over that last line. And I think that's kind of where we are at the end of this first phase of COVID. We're kind of supporting each other to just limp over that line. But if he doesn't acknowledge that he needs the help, he'd crash and burn, and the other two would kind of just walk past him. Whereas this way they all get there.
Yes.
I'm loving a comment here from Hannah, who I don't know who you are, Hannah, but thank you for this sentence. We should extend to one another the same empathy that we give to patients to allow everyone's resilience to shine through. And you've made the point, Sarah. I made the mistake of thinking resilience was something I had to push. I had to do extra stuff to control my stress and enhance my resilience, and burnt myself out by doing too much to try and control my resilience. As you said, it is within us. It is innate, but it will only be accessible if we show each other compassion and empathy. And it's a sad reflection that as healthcare workers, surgeons don't always do that. So thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, I love that. And again, you know, you've all seen yourself have so much compassion. You've seen it pouring out of you with the people that you help every day. And so, yes, I mean, that in itself, what Hannah's just said is a realization. Hey, we are all humans, all of us. Humanity, humans first. And this leads on really nicely to the next bit. If you think of resilience, assume that it's always switched on. And from that place, think of it as our inner sat nav. And if you think of the example of you're in a car, you're driving a car to a place you've not really been before, so you've got your sat nav on, but you've got a car, the car's full, you've got all your friends in the car, and everyone's chatting excitedly, and you can't hear the sat nav. And but it doesn't mean it's not there. It's always switched on, and it's always there to guide us. And the thing with sat nav, if you think about this, I'm saying this as a metaphor, but it's really helpful to think of it like this. Sat nav is not really going to tell us how many, you know, in 10 miles time, which turning we need to take on the roundabout when we get to there. All it ever really tells us is what we need to do next. And that's what resilience is like. Our inner sat nav is like. It's only telling us, it's only able to tell us what next step to take. And where we get ourselves in a bit of a head spin, if you like, is when we try and work out solutions to problems that haven't happened yet. And resilience is a bit like, I'm not going to help you out because it's not actually happening. It's only happening in the constructs of your mind. And we all do it. It's such a human thing to do. I think I gave this example last time, is that when it all kicked off in March, I think there was one particular week where email after email, call after call, slowly but surely, it wasn't slowly at all of our business, the business that I run with my husband, it all got cancelled. So we run a consultancy, and part of that is recruitment. And you can imagine all the recruitment got frozen, any offers cancelled, everything, and all the pipeline was gone. And I don't know why I'm smiling. Well, I can now, but looking back, I was very serious about it, and I lost my head for about 3 days. And what happened was, my head went straight to June. You know, I was picturing June as, we are bankrupt, we're going to have to sell the house. You know, I was assuming the worst. But because we feel our thinking, and we are literally walking, talking movie production studios, I never questioned my thinking. Like, it really felt real to me. And then about 3 or 4 days later, boom, resilience woke me up, and it was come back to the present moment. And that's what resilience can do as well. It wakes us up to the reality of the present moment. The closer we sail to the reality of what's actually happening, the more psychological success we'll have. Does that make sense? So resilience only works in reality. It can't sort out the problems we've made up in our heads. It's a bit like the emergency services. So I'm only coming out if there's a real emergency, and then I will really help you out. But I'm not coming for, you know, anything other than that. Full of metaphors today, aren't I? So resilience lets you know when you've stopped using it. Now, this is the great, Sue, this will speak to what you were talking about earlier on. I used to think that the angrier I felt, or the more urgent something felt in my mind, I thought that was a signal to take action. So if I was feeling cross, really cross in my head, I thought that was a signal to let someone have it. Or if I felt like I had to make a decision and it needed to be urgent, the more urgent it felt, the more I was like, just make a decision. And what happened with that is it felt right in the moment, but I had little messes to clear up afterwards, you know, apologies to make. And I don't know if you can relate to that. Sue's nodding there. Yeah, I mean, we're human. We all get stuck in our heads sometimes and fall for our thinking. But actually, we have this beautiful feedback system so cleverly designed, and it is our emotions. And how it works, this is how I've come to see it work, is that the angrier we feel, or the more cross we feel, or the more anxious we feel, that is a sign that we're not seeing things quite right. It's a sign that we are taking our thinking a bit too seriously. It's a sign that we're perhaps ruminating about future problems that haven't even happened yet. It's a sign that we've gone off track. It's a little bit like if you're driving down the road and you suddenly hit a rumble strip, you know, those white lines, and you sort of, your car goes a bit shaky. It's like that. It's just letting you know you've gone off track. You just need to come back to yourself. You need to come back to the reality. Come out of la la land and come back to reality. And so that is what I've come to see as a very useful feedback system. When we're feeling uncomfortable, overwhelmed, burdened, stressed, it's a sign that we are taking our thinking far too seriously. Really paradoxical. And that was a 180-degree shift for me. When I saw that, it really helped a lot. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour as well. We've come to the end of it now. What has that opened up anything for you about how you see resilience? What I'm looking for is ways in which it can help you, ways in which perhaps things you've realized that you didn't realize before. What's coming through? I will come out.
The chat, I must.
Yeah.
I love it when people sort of encompass one's thoughts and help. And I'm just going to read another quote from Jennifer Barwell, who says, sometimes resilience is branded as a failing of the person to cope. I did that for sure. Having a new understanding and sharing people's feelings that it isn't a failing of the individual, and sometimes the system is impossible and too much. This is the start of a new approach to resilience and how to be better and a united team. And I think that's the message we should try and take away from this evening, because I used to focus a lot on individual resilience. Deepa mentioned the camaraderie we've all felt through the COVID active phase. I think we're about to face our biggest challenge yet of rebuilding a musculoskeletal service for our country. The population is going to get older and iller, and with our problem, we're not going to be able to treat them in the same way. If we do not adopt that image for all our team, then we will not get back to an effective MSK service for the country. I would say that strongly, and I'm encouraged that senior colleagues like myself and Deepa are supported by our younger colleagues to take this forward. We should do.
Yeah, so I think I totally agree with you, Tony. I think actually this is, and somebody else did mention that this is probably the most difficult time for orthopods.
Yeah.
And it's a time when we need to come together as teams, and the systems and processes that we develop and all the equipment needs we're going to need and the surroundings that we're going to need to work in are really important. And those people that are trying to develop those for us to make it possible for us to do well are also need to lead us compassionately. And as you say, we also need to take along, and Emily alluded to this, we need to treat the teams that are going to enable us to do that compassionately too. Certainly our anaesthetists, our theatre staff, our surgical care practitioners, physios, all the people, all our ward staff who are going to help us along this route, as well as educating our higher leaders about how to be compassionate to us too, and to ensure that we are working together as teams and have a really great team with great compassionate leadership. And then if we're all thinking of each other, we're much more likely to perform well and to produce the goods for the patients that we're trying to serve. Anybody any thoughts?
I can't see the chat from here.
I mean, the comments in the chat are on similar lines, and it's from various, you know, GP comments were being made with the concept of working as a team and recognizing. To me, it's great that we've got a group of people here tonight that feel this way, and recognizing, as I say, the compassionate leadership, Sue, that we have to help people move out of the command and control into this compassionate phase.
Okay, so it looks like Sarah has a question for us in her next slide.
Yes, we looked, I asked again, I think everyone's just done the poll there, how resilient would you say you are now? And I think it's pushed up very slightly. Is that right? Can't see it on screen now. But I saw a couple more pushed up towards, I saw a couple more tens as well. So, well, I hope that's been useful. I mean, I've certainly enjoyed just hanging out here tonight and just talking. It's such a great topic. And just in summary, resilience is innate, built in, and it is worth coming away from here and just reflecting on those moments where perhaps you've completely forgotten just how resilient you were, individually and as a team as well. And don't underestimate just how powerful it is when you as an individual begin to show up differently, what that does for other people around you as well. You know, I talk about resilience being realizations and insights and aha moments. You know, I think you've got the potential to have had some pretty big realizations this evening as well. I mean, I'm an outsider essentially, and my goodness, I would never expect you guys to be completely strong all the time. I don't think anyone would say that. It's a culture, isn't it, that's been built up over time and been repeated, and but you know, cultures change all the time, and it starts with just one person seeing that there could be something another way, even as big as institution. Who knows? The more you start to look there, the more you see it working for you. And I mentioned this before, but it's worth saying again on the last webinar. Resilience comes to us sometimes as a whisper. It's quieter than the ego. Do you know what I mean by that? It's so the ego might be saying, I've got to be strong, I've got to show up, I can't let anyone know that I'm feeling stressed out, I've got to put on a front. But actually the whisper underneath might be like, that's not true. You know, see what would happen if you actually were genuinely vulnerable, see what might happen. And this is not a to-do from me, it's just an example. Resilience is very personalized and tailored to each person, and it's a fresh new thought that comes to you in the moment about how to navigate the needs of the moment. So the more you start to look there, the more you'll see it working for you, and there is far less to do than you think. So
thank you.
Like I said earlier, yeah.
Thank you so much. So I think we're getting towards the end of our time now. So I'm just going to ask for a few reflections from the panelists about what they've taken home most from today. And I'll start with me. I think I love the sat-nav analogy, and the clouds that are, and the big bass, the big brass band that's playing over my head all the time. And I'm going to take that away from myself. Thank you. Emily?
I think for me, I've been really impressed with the chat on the right hand side of the screen. Actually, people sharing that this has been really tough. It has been a really tough few months, and it's okay for people to acknowledge that, and it's going to be essential that people support each other and can talk about it. That is the way that things will get better, and that's been really, I've been really impressed with the participants and their and they're sharing those learnings with other people. There is support out there for people if you need it, and actually it shows strength to accept support and to acknowledge that that's where you are. Resilience is one of those topics that people use as a buzzword but don't really know what it means, and like somebody said earlier, can definitely be used as kind of a criticism of people, and sort of a lack of resilience, weak, that kind of and it just isn't true. That's just not true.
Admit when your resilience is making you feel uncomfortable and those messages are coming back to you. Tony.
Well, Emily was describing me about 10 years ago. What I've taken away from this evening is, first of all, would we have thought 6 months ago that 40 people involved in orthopaedic and MSK would be sat here sharing openly the importance of resilience, emotional well-being and conversations? I think we're transforming the way in which orthopaedic MSK staff look about working together. And that's the positive I take out of the COVID pandemic. So to me, it's a plea, the 40 participants we have today, if we all spread our message to one person tomorrow or in the next week, and we ask them to spread it, then we're getting that ripple effect and we're getting that movement. And I'm not looking for political power votes. This is a time to change. And I believe we can do that.
Thank you, Tony. Any last thoughts, Sarah?
I just think there's a lot to be said for following the feeling of what feels right and feels good inside. So, that feeling when you do reach out to your colleagues and you have a lovely chat and you have that, oh, it's such a relief to talk about, what we've been going through, and that feeling you can keep you going for days. When you feel like you are part of a community, and sometimes it just takes one person to do it. So yeah, these 40 people on this call, if all of you took that on board, perhaps you'd be amazed at what comes back. We're built to connect with one another, not be apart. We're not meant to be silos.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you so much to all of the attendees who have really significantly helped all of us to understand ourselves. And I think the more we think about this and appreciate that we do have inner resilience, and that we need to support each other, and it's okay to not be okay, and to talk to people about it. It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you this evening, and hopefully you'll have a lovely rest of the evening. Thank you very much.